I have carried a lot of things across a lot of borders. Seed stock, sealed cultures. Once, a crate of soil which took 9 days of paperwork and a formal apology. But the thing I have carried longest, and the thing that has caused me the most trouble, is a ceramic column about the height of my forearm, wrapped in canvas, with a brass crank on the side and a rubber gasket that I have replaced 4 times. It filters water, that is all it does. I was 41 years old when the Callie's trade legation put down on the water moon of Semireth, and I was, by title, the legation's steward of water and green. What that meant in practice was that I ran the hydroponic racks, I kept the recyclers honest, and I was responsible for the fact that 31 humans in a foreign house had something to drink. It is not a post that people compete for. It is the post you are given when you are competent and unimportant, and I had been both for a long time. Ambassador Delia Marchant went down the ramp first, in gray, with her hands empty, which is the correct human posture for a first landing. Behind her went the Trade Council, and the Council's aides, and the 2 engineers and Dr. Ferris. I went last, because I had the crate. Semireth is a small moon and mostly rock, and it does not look like a place that would build its whole civilization on the subject of drinking. The surface is gray and dry and cratered, and there is a thin, cold wind that carries a smell like wet slate. All the water is underneath. It has been underneath for 3 billion years, in vaults and fissures and slow reservoirs, filtered through more kilometers of stone than any machine I will ever build. And when the Quichen came up out of their oceans and went looking for the finest water in their reach of space, they found it there, and they never left. They met us in the receiving hall with a cup. That is their greeting. It is not a gesture and it is not a metaphor. A Quichen who wishes you well pours a measure of the water he is entitled to drink, and offers it, and watches you take it. A Quichen who does not wish you well offers you nothing, and stands with his hands folded low. The whole grammar of their society sits in the question of whose spring you may drink from, and they have been refining that grammar for a very long time. Ossip Von was the one holding the cup. He was the keeper of the Hall of 9 Springs, and he was the tallest person in the room by half a head. The Quichen are sleek. That is the first thing you notice. Their pelt is short and silver blue, and it lies flat and wet-looking even when it is dry, and it moves in the light the way an otter's back moves in the light. Their hands are long and dark and webbed to the second joint. Their eyes are amber with a horizontal pupil, and a second lid that flicks across sideways when they are thinking, which they do often, which gives an unsettling impression that they are constantly blinking away something you said. And they have a frill. It sits low around the throat, a collar of loose skin, and it lies down flat when they are calm. It lifts when they are surprised. It stands up straight and trembles when they are scandalized, and I would come to know that particular movement extremely well. "You are welcome to the 9th Spring," Ossip said. His voice clicked. Quichen speech has a sibilant undertow, and the translator patch on my collar rendered it into something flat and pleasant and lost most of the music. It is a modest water. It is what we offer to guests until we know them. Delia drank. Then the council. Then, one at a time, the rest of us in order of rank, which put me at the very end of the line, holding my crate under one arm while I took the cup with my free hand. It was good water. I want to be fair about that from the beginning, because a great deal of what follows makes the Quichen look ridiculous, and they were not ridiculous. They were snobs, which is different. The 9th Spring was cold and had a very faint mineral edge, like a coin held in the mouth, and a long, clean finish, and it was the 9th best water they had, and it was better than anything I had ever drunk in my life. I said so. Ossip's frill settled another centimeter, which I later learned was the equivalent of a man deciding you might be worth talking to. "You have a palate," he said, surprised. "I have a tongue," I said. "I don't know what else I have." He seemed to find that acceptable. He walked us through the Hall of 9 Springs on the way to the guest wing, and I will say now that it was the most beautiful room I have ever been in. It is cut down into the rock, 9 alcoves in a curve, each one holding a basin of black stone, each basin fed by its own vein from somewhere far below. The water comes up on its own. Nobody pumps it. Nobody has ever pumped it. It rises because the rock is old and the pressure is patient, and it has been rising into those 9 basins since before the Quichen had a written language, and the whole hall is lit only by the light that comes off the water. The first spring sat at the center. The basin was small. The water in it did not appear to move at all. "How much of that do you drink in a year?" I asked. 240 milliliters, Osik said, "divided among 9, on the day of the accounting. And the rest of the time." "We remember it," he said. I put the crate down in my quarters and I unpacked it, because I had been traveling for 11 weeks and my routine is my routine. The ceramic column came out of the canvas. The charcoal cartridge came out of its foil. The catch basin, the pre-strainer, the spare gasket, the crank. I clamped it to the sill of the window that looked out at the gray and the dust, and I ran the first liter through to wet the medium, and I poured that liter away, because the first liter is always chalky. Sethri Ulv was standing in the doorway watching me. She was a junior attendant of the hall, small for a Quichen, and her frill was up and quivering, and her second lids were going like a shutter. "What," she said, "is that?" I told her. I want to be exact about what I said because I have gone over it many times since. I said, "It is a filter. Water goes in the top. It goes down through a ceramic wall with pores too small for most living things to pass, and then through burnt wood, which holds on to bad tastes and certain poisons, and then it comes out the bottom and you drink it." Sethri did not move. "What water?" she said. "Whatever water there is." "From where?" "From wherever I am." She left. She did not run, but she covered ground. 20 minutes later, Osik Von came into my room without knocking, which the Quichen do not do, and stood in front of my window sill and looked at the ceramic column for a long time with his hands folded low. Behind him were 4 other Quichen I had not met. Their frills were all up. "Explain this," he said. I explained it again. I demonstrated. I took a jug of the 9th spring, which was the water we had been given for our house use, and I poured it in the top and cranked, and the crank turned the auger that keeps the ceramic face clean, and after a minute water dripped into the catch basin. Osik watched the drip, the way you would watch someone spit into a chalice. "That water was already water," he said. "Yes." "And you have made it." He stopped. He was hunting for a word and I could see him not finding it. His frill went rigid. "What have you made it?" "Cleaner," I said. "In theory, that was clean already." "There is no such thing as cleaner." He said it slowly, the way you speak to a man who has confused 2 very different objects. "Water is water. That which is not water is HFY. There is no bridge." Here is where I should stop and explain the thing that took me 9 days to understand. Because, if you do not understand it, none of what happened afterward will be funny. And it was very funny, in the way that things are funny only long afterward and only to the person who was not offended. The Quichen do not have a word for dirty water. They have a word for water. They have a word for HFY, which the patch translated as not water, and which I eventually understood to mean something closer to the absence where water was supposed to be. A puddle of mud is not bad water. It is a place where there is no water, which happens to be wet. Their language cannot construct the sentence "this water is bad," because the moment it is bad it stops, grammatically and morally and practically, being water. So they do not clean water. The idea is not repugnant to them. It is incoherent. To take HFY and do something to it and then call the result water is, in their understanding, not chemistry. It is a lie. It is a species standing over a hole in the ground and insisting the hole is a spring. Osik Von looked at my ceramic column and understood, correctly and instantly, exactly what it was for. And what he saw was a machine for lying. "You drink a lie," he said. "I drink water," I said. "You drink the lie." His frill was trembling. This is what you carry across the stars. This is what you set on the sill of a house that has offered you the ninth spring. I have been in a number of rooms where I was being insulted, and I have found that there is one reliable move. I filled a cup from the catch basin, the ninth spring, run through my filter, which had done almost nothing to it because there was almost nothing to do, and I held it out to him. Would you like some? I would like to be able to report that this was strategy. It was not. It was hospitality, which is the only strategy I have. If there is water in a room and you are in the room, I will offer you water. My grandmother taught me that with a switch. Ossip von stepped back so fast he collided with the attendant behind him. Nobody in that doorway took the cup. Nobody in that doorway would take a cup from me for 11 days. I drank it myself because it was perfectly good water, and I said, "It's the same as what's in the jug," and Ossip said, "It is not," and left, and that was the beginning. The word went around the hall in a night. By morning I had a name. In their tongue it was Shevakesh, and the patch gave it to me as Lai Cup, though the human engineers, who heard the story second-hand at breakfast and thought it was the finest thing that had ever happened to anybody, translated it as Mud Cup and used it on me daily for the rest of the deployment. I did not stop cranking. That is, I think, the whole of my contribution. I want to be clear that I did not make a point of it, and I did not do it defiantly, and I never once cranked louder than necessary. It is simply that I have run a liter of water through that column every morning of my adult life, and I was not going to stop because a room full of people with beautiful throats found me disgusting. Every morning at the 6th bell, I set the jug on the sill, and I turned the crank 40 times, and I drank what came out. Sethri Ulv watched from the corridor. She thought I did not see her. She was 19 or the Kishan equivalent, and she had the look of a young person who has been told that a thing is unspeakable and would very much like to hear it spoken. The talks did not go well. They were not supposed to be difficult talks. Callies is a hard colony 4 jumps out, and Callies has ore, and Callies has hydrogen, and Callies does not have anything anyone wants to drink, and the Kishan sell water. That is their entire economy. They sell it the way old families sell wine, by the sealed vessel, by the vintage, by the spring, at prices that would make you sit down. We were not there to buy the first spring. We were there to buy bulk from the 6th and 7th, in quantity, on a 15-year contract. And we had the credit, and we had the shipping, and there was no reason on any world for the answer to be no. The answer was no. It was never no out loud. It was a request for another season of consideration. It was the observation that the Grand Palette had not yet returned from a retreat. It was the gentle suggestion that the human party might enjoy a tour of the lower vaults, which was offered to us on 4 separate occasions, and which cost us 4 days. On the 5th day Delia came to my quarters, sat on my bed without being asked, and said, "They think we're peasants." "They think we're liars," I said. "It's different." "Is it better or worse?" "Worse," I said. "You can trade with a peasant." She rubbed her eyes. She was 58 and she had been doing this for 30 years, and she was very good at it, and I watched her decide not to say the thing she was about to say. She said it anyway. "Bram the filter." "No. I'm not going to order you." "Good. I'm going to ask you." I said, "Ambassador, if I put it away, then I have agreed with them. Then the only difference between us is that they have good manners and I have bad ones, and there is nothing else to say about humans at all." I turned the crank once absently and stopped, because it was not the 6th bell and I do not crank outside the 6th bell. If I keep it on the sill, then somewhere in this rock there is one of them who is lying awake wondering what the pores are made of. Delia looked at me for a while. "You've thought about this more than I expected," she said. "I have thought about very little else for 20 years, I said. "Nobody ever asks." The banquet was on the 8th day, and it was, I think, the finest thing I will ever be invited to and the worst evening of my professional life. They laid it in the Hall of 9 Springs itself, on low black tables, and the light came off the basins and up onto the ceiling and moved there. There was food. Quichen food is astonishing, and I will not describe it because it is not the point, but food is not the event. Water is the event. There were 11 services. Each service was a thimble. The Grand Palate, Oremy Duel, presided from the center, and he was old, and his pelt had gone white at the muzzle and around the frill, and he had the stillness of a man who has been the final authority on a subject for 60 years, and has stopped needing to demonstrate it. Between the fourth and the fifth service, Oremy Duel turned his head very slightly toward Delia and said, so that the entire hall could hear him, "Ambassador, is it true that one of your people has brought a device for the manufacture of water?" The hall got quiet, not the quiet of a room that is scandalized, the quiet of a room that has been waiting for the joke. Delia did not look at me. It's a filter Grand Palate. So I am told. It takes Sheva and it produces. The old man paused and his second lids flicked, and he let the pause go on exactly 1 beat too long, a beverage. The hall laughed. The Quichen laugh with the frill and the shoulders, silently, a sort of ripple, and to see 200 of them do it at once is like watching wind move over a field. "He is here, I think," Oremy Duel said, "the steward." I stood up. There was no help for it. "Steward, what does it taste like, the water you make?" I could feel Delia not breathing. I said, "Depends on what I put in it, Grand Palate." More laughter. Somebody at the far end of the hall said something I did not catch and the patch did not render, and Ossip Vaughan, seated 2 places from the Grand Palate with his hands folded low, did not laugh at all. "Would you not prefer," Oremy Duel said kindly, "to simply drink water?" "I'd prefer that every day of my life, sir," I said. "It hasn't always been on offer." He nodded. He was satisfied. The joke had gone where he wanted it to go, and he raised his thimble and the 5th service was poured, and I sat down, and Delia put her hand flat on the table next to mine for 1 second, which from her was an embrace. Here is the part I did not say at the banquet, because you do not tell a room like that anything true. I was born on Calais in the 3rd generation, in a settlement called Holly's Yard, which is named for nobody in my family, and is a coincidence I have stopped explaining. Calais has water. Calais has a great deal of water. It runs down out of the highlands green and cold, and it looks like the best water any of us had ever seen, and for the first 11 years of the settlement, we drank it. There is an organism in it. It is not a bacterium and it is not a protozoan, and the taxonomists have never been happy with what it is. It does not kill adults. It settles into the gut of children under the age of about 6, and it eats, gently, unhurriedly, the lining they need to absorb fat, and the children get thin, and then they get very thin, and then, sometime in the 2nd year, they stop. My grandmother buried 2. My mother was the 3rd child, and she lived because by the time she was weaned my grandmother had built, out of a length of clay pipe, and a bag of charcoal from the stove and a plug of raw cotton, the ugliest object on the planet, and had run every drop of water that entered that house through it twice, and had made the whole family drink it, and had endured being told by her neighbors that she was superstitious and difficult, and that the water was good water. Anyone can see it's good water. 11 years later, Calais made her filter mandatory. They put a photograph of it in the settlement hall. In the photograph, it is on a table, and it is filthy, because the outside of a filter is supposed to be filthy. That is where the dirt goes. That is what I said on the windowsill of the Hall of 9 Springs. That is the thing they were laughing at. I did not tell them. I did not tell them then, and I did not tell them later, and I have never been sure whether that was dignity or cowardice, and I have decided it does not matter, because the water does not care why you filter it. On the 9th day, the 4th spring tasted thin. I was not there. I have the account from Sethri, who was there, and who told me about it much later, sitting on the floor of my quarters with her knees up, in the flat, exhausted voice of somebody describing an accident. The fourth spring is not the finest. It is the working spring of the hall, the one from which the keeper draws for the daily accounting, and Ossip von drew from it that morning as he had drawn from it every morning for 19 years, and he raised the cup, and he stopped. He did not say this water is bad, he could not. He said, and Sethri repeated it to me exactly, the fourth spring is not giving today. He sent for Hanth Ilam, the steward of the vaults, who came and drew and tasted and stood for a long moment and said that the fourth spring was in a withdrawn condition, and that this was known to happen, and that it would pass. On the 10th day the second spring was thin. The second spring had never been thin. There is a written record of the second spring going back 900 years, kept in the hall in a script I cannot read, and it has 311 entries, and every one of them says the same 3 words, which mean, more or less, as it was. On the 11th day, Ossip von opened the vaults. I heard about it because Dr. Ferris heard the alarm, which was not an alarm but a bell, rung slowly from below, on and on, for 2 hours. Delia asked what it meant and was told it was a rite. It was not a rite. It was the sound of the keeper of the Hall of 9 Springs going down 800 meters of black stone stairs to the mother cistern, which they call the Umara, which every spring in the hall descends from, and finding it changed. I have seen the surveys since. There is a fissure in the western wall of the Umara that opened, or reopened, or finally admitted what it had been admitting slowly for a decade, and through it came water from a shallow aquifer nobody had ever charted, and in that water there is a mat. It is not toxic to Kishan in any dose they would ever drink. It is not even, by human standards, especially unpleasant. It is a filamentous thing, colorless, and it produces a compound that tastes to a Kishan the way a copper coin and a rotting tooth taste to us, and it produces about 3 parts per billion of it, and that is enough. 3 parts per billion. Their palate is not decoration. It is the most sensitive chemical instrument I have ever encountered in a living body. They can taste a spring's depth, its rock, its age. And what they tasted on the 11th morning in every one of the 9 basins, one after another, was the Umara. I need you to understand what this did to them, because when I first heard it described I thought, well, they have a water problem. Get the water from somewhere else. They had no somewhere else. Semerith's entire hydrology is the Umara. Every basin, every cistern, every household tap on that moon comes down from it. There is no second source. There has never needed to be a second source, in the same way that there has never needed to be a second sun. And they had no treatment, not inadequate treatment, not old-fashioned treatment, none. Not one filter, not one still, not one boiler, not one sand bed, not one settling tank on a moon of 400,000 people. Why would you build a machine to remove something from water? If there is something in it to remove, it is not water. It is Sheva, and Sheva is not a problem to be solved. It is a fact to be walked away from. They had walked away from things for 3 billion years. The rock did the work. They simply chose which basin to stand at. And now every basin on the moon had gone. They had, in sealed vessels in the merchant vaults, roughly 4 days of drinking for the population, and they would not open the sealed vessels because the sealed vessels were not water. They were inventory. They were the 6th and 7th and 8th springs of 11 prior seasons, under contract, spoken for, entered in the record, and I want to be careful here because it would be easy to make them sound insane. They were not insane. If a human city's reservoir failed tomorrow, and the only remaining water was in the vault of the central bank, denominated and pledged and lent against, I do not think we would open it in 4 days either. I think we would form a committee. They formed a committee. The Kishan drink an enormous amount. Their pelt is not fur. It is a hydrated organ, and it must be wetted from the inside. A Kishan who has not drunk in a day is stiff and slow, and one who has not drunk in 3 days has a frill that goes gray and cracks at the edge, and a Kishan who has not drunk in 6 days is dying, and knows the exact hour of it, because they have a word for that too. Resupply from their nearest holding was 41 days. And here is the thing that Sethri told me, sitting on my floor with her knees up, the thing I think about more than any other part of it. They could not file the report. The steward of the vaults, Hanth Ilam, had to enter the condition of the Umara into the record of the hall, and the record of the hall has for 900 years exactly two categories. A spring is giving or it is silent. Silent means dry. Silent means the rock has closed. There is a procedure for silent, and the procedure is grief, and then relocation. The Umara was not silent, it was pouring. It was pouring in enormous, generous, indifferent quantity, and every drop of it was Sheva, and there was no line on the form for that. And Hanth Ilam sat in the vault office for 6 hours with a stylus in his webbed hand and could not write a sentence, because in his language the sentence did not exist. And at the end of the 6 hours, he entered the Umara as giving, because it was, and the vaults were therefore officially full, and he went to his quarters and did not come out. Human beings would have lied. I want to be fair to us, too. We would have written contaminated in the box and gone to find a bucket. On the evening of the 12th day, I was in my quarters with the light off. I keep the light off in the evening. It is a habit from the yard where the light cost money. There was a knock. Nobody had knocked on my door in 12 days. Ossip Van was standing in the corridor alone with his hands folded low, and his frill was flat, flatter than I had ever seen it, pressed down against his throat like something trying to disappear. He said, "Steward Hollies, I ask permission to observe an object." The patch rendered it flat. It was not flat. I found out later that he had used a register of the Quichua tongue that is reserved for addressing the springs themselves, a construction so formal that Sethri, when I described it to her, put both hands over her muzzle. He had come to my door and spoken to me the way a keeper speaks to the first spring on the day of the accounting. I said, "Come in." He came in and he stood in front of the windowsill and he looked at the ceramic column, which was where it had been for 12 days, filthy on the outside, canvas folded under it, brass crank dull. Observation is permitted. "You can touch it," I said. He did not touch it. He looked at it for a long time, then he said, "The pores, how small." 1/5 of a micron, give or take, it's an old element. And the burnt wood. Charcoal activated. It's got a surface area you wouldn't believe. A spoonful of it has the area of a field. Things stick to it, tastes, some poisons, not all. "Not all," he repeated. "Not all," I said. "It won't take out salt. It won't take out most metals. It won't do anything at all about anything dissolved that doesn't want to stick. It is a slow, ugly, stupid device, and it is 180 years out of date, and I could show you 6 better ones in the ship's stores that need power we don't have to spare." I did not say, "and it is enough." I want that noted. I did not say it. There was a version of that evening where I said it, and I have replayed that version, and in it I am a smaller man. Ossip Van stood in front of my window. Below and behind us, 800 meters down, the Umara was pouring. "Steward," he said, "will it take out the filament?" I don't know what the filament is. He told me. He told me in the technical register precisely with numbers because they may not treat their water, but by God they know it. They had characterized that organism within 9 hours, its size, its shape, its chemistry, the compound and its concentration, and the receptor it fitted in the Quichua tongue like a key. 4 to 6 microns. Filamentous. The compound moderately hydrophobic. I said, the ceramic will take the organism out. Anything over about 1/5 of a micron doesn't get through, and yours is 20 times that. The charcoal will take out most of the compound for a while, until it's loaded, and then it will stop and you won't know it's stopped except by tasting it, and I imagine you'll know. For a while. 600 liters a cartridge. At a guess with that concentration, then it's finished. How many cartridges have you? 4, I said, and the one that's in it which is half gone. He did the arithmetic. I watched him do it. The frill did not move. Steward Hollies, Ossip Von said, I have called your device a lie cup. I have said this in the hall. I have said it to my attendants, and I have said it in the corridor where you could hear me. And once, on the third day, I said it in your presence and made a joke of the word for thirst. I remember. I withdraw none of it, he said, because to withdraw it I would have to say that the water it produces is water, and I do not have the words to say that, and I am not certain I have the mind to think it. His second lids flicked once. I ask instead for a smaller thing. May I turn the crank? I said yes. He turned it. He was very strong, and he turned it much too fast at first, and the auger chattered, and I put my hand on his wrist without thinking about it, which is a thing you must never do to a Keishan. And he let me, and I slowed him down, and after that he turned it correctly, 40 turns, and the water came down into the catch basin in a thin, steady thread and made almost no sound at all. I filled a cup. I held it out to him. For the 13th time in 12 days, I held out a cup to a Keishan. He sat down on the floor of my quarters with the cup in both hands. He was there for 1 hour. I know because I watched the ship's clock and did not look at him, because he had asked to observe an object, and I thought perhaps he would prefer not to be one. At the end of the hour he drank it. He made no sound. He did not gag, and he did not shudder, and he did not weep, which is what a human would have done, one of the three. He sat with the empty cup and his eyes closed and his second lids not moving at all, and then he opened his eyes and looked at the ceramic column with an expression I have no equipment to read, and he said, "It is not water." "No," I said. "It is not Sheva." "No." "Steward," he said, "what is it?" And I said the only honest thing, which is that I did not know either, that we had never needed to work it out, that on Calais we simply called it water and let the philosophers alone. He listened to the patch render that into his language, and I watched the sentence arrive in him and find nowhere to sit. Then he said, "May I have another?" I gave him another. He drank it standing. He said, "Sethri Ulv is 19. Her frill grayed at the edge this afternoon. She has drunk nothing since the 11th morning because she is an attendant of the hall and the attendants drink last." He was not asking. That is what I want to say about Ossip Von. He had not come to ask. He had come to observe an object in the correct register with his hands folded low, because he did not have a word for the thing he needed, and he was not going to invent one for his own comfort. He stood in my quarters and told me a fact about a 19-year-old and waited. I said, "Bring her." I did not sleep for a while after that. The flow rate of that column, cranked hard with a clean face, is about 9 liters an hour. That is the number. Everything that happened over the next 6 days is contained in that number, and I have never in my life been so aware of a small quantity. Sethri came at the second bell. She drank 1 cup and sat down on the floor very suddenly, and her frill lifted about a centimeter, and she said something the patch would not render, and Ossip said, "She says the taste of the burnt wood is on it." And I said, "It is, I'm sorry, it's an old cartridge." And Sethri said distinctly in the flat translated voice, "Do not apologize," and drank a second cup and then a third. At the 4th bell, there were 9 of them in the corridor. Nobody had told anybody. I have asked. There was no announcement and no order, and Ossip forbade the subject to be raised in the hall, and it went from one attendant to another in the dark. And by the 4th bell, there were 9 of them standing in the corridor outside a human's door with their hands folded low, waiting to be offered something they did not have a name for. I cranked. Delia woke up somewhere around the 5th bell, came down the corridor in her night clothes, saw 9 Keishan in a queue, saw me on a stool at the window with my sleeve rolled up, and turned around and went back up the corridor and got the engineers. By the second morning, there were 300 people in the hall of 9 Springs. Not at my door. Ossip had it moved by then. He had the column carried down to the hall itself and set on a plinth of black stone in front of the 4th spring, which is where the working water is drawn, and he had it done in the open, at midday, with the hall full, because he was a keeper, and he understood that a thing done in a corridor at night is a shame, and a thing done in the hall at midday is a policy. We ran 2 shifts, Ferris and I and both engineers, and once we had shown them how, the attendants of the hall, 4 hours on and 4 hours off. The rate never improved. 9 liters an hour, 500 milliliters to a cation, and there were 400,000 of them on that moon, and we could water fewer than 400 a day, and everybody in that hall could do that arithmetic and did. I want to be precise about what I did and did not do in those 6 days, because I have read one account of it, written by somebody who was not there, that has me delivering a speech. I did not deliver a speech. I told them the taste of the charcoal would be strong for the first 200 liters and then would fade, and to keep drinking through it. I told them the column could not remove salt, could not remove most metals, and would not protect them from anything dissolved and unfriendly that they had not yet found, and that if the fissure widened and brought something new down into the umara, my filter might pass it through into their mouths without changing it at all, and that they would not know until they were ill, and that they had to keep the assay running every hour, and they did. I told them the ceramic element was cracked. It cracked on the 2nd day, a hairline from the heat of continuous work, and I sealed it with a bead of adhesive from the ship's stores, and I told them the seal was worse than the ceramic, and that everything downstream of that crack was a compromise. Osick entered this in the record. It is still in the record. I told them when they asked me, and they ask me constantly in the technical register, with numbers that no, I could not build another one out of the hall's stone, because the poor size was not something you achieved by wanting to. It was something you achieved with a kiln and a particle size distribution, and about 200 years of somebody else's mistakes. And I told them that we had 4 cartridges. Then the engineers found the diatomite. I will not pretend this was my doing. Tomas Ada found it on the 3rd day, in the geological survey the cation had given us as a courtesy at the landing, in a bed 40 kilometers north of the hall, and he came into the hall at a dead run holding a slate and shouting my name. And Osick Vaughn, keeper of the Hall of 9 Springs, was standing in the middle of the room and did not reprimand him for shouting. Diatomaceous earth, the fossil skeletons of small things, a bed of it as long as a river, sitting on the surface of a moon where nobody had ever had the smallest reason to look at it. You pack it in a column and it will strain out anything 4 microns across, and it will do it at 100 times my rate. The cation had 11,000 people digging by nightfall. They were extraordinary. That is what nobody tells you about the story, because it is not the funny part. Once the hall accepted the thing, they moved like nothing I have ever seen. They had assay teams on every bed by the 2nd dawn. They had a kiln fired for the charcoal. Semirith has no trees. They burned the harvest stalks of a food crop, and the first batch was useless, and the second was adequate, and the 4th was better than mine. They had 600 columns standing in the lower vault by the 5th day, each one a black stone cylinder packed by hand, ugly, running slow, running gray at first and then clear. And every one of those 600 columns was, in their language, a machine for lying, and every cation who packed one knew it, and they packed them anyway in silence with their frills flat, and I have never respected anyone more. Osick worked beside me for 4 days, and on the 4th day he said, "Steward, on the 3rd morning you said to me that the device was slow, ugly, and stupid. It is. You said this to a man who had come to your door in the register of the Springs," he said. "You said it before he asked you for anything. It was true. You knew what we were about to do to your position in this hall. You knew we would have to come to you, all of us, in front of one another, and you began by telling us the 4 things your device could not do." His second lids flicked. "Why?" I put down the crank. I remember that I had a blister and that the blister had opened, and that I had wrapped my palm in a strip of the canvas. The column had been carried in. I said, Because in about 11 days somebody's going to fill a column and not check the assay and drink it and be fine and do it again and be fine. And after a while nobody will check it at all. And a filter that nobody checks is worse than no filter at all, because everybody drinks. Osik van stood with his hands folded low for a long time. On Callie's, he said, the thing in your water, did it come after this device or before? Before. How long before? 2 children, I said. He did not ask whose. I have thought about that a good deal. A human would have asked whose. A human would have needed to know whether he was standing next to a man who had lost something, so that he would know how to arrange his face. Osik van simply took the number and held it, and after a moment he took up the crank and continued at exactly the pace I had taught him. Oremy Duel, the grand pallet, came on the 6th day. He had not been seen since the 11th morning. He was 90-some years old, and he had not drunk since the 11th morning either, which by then was 5 days, and he came down the length of the Hall of 9 Springs on his own feet, without an attendant, and his frill was gray to the second fold, and there were cracks in the edge of it like the edge of dried clay. The hall was full, 300, 400. They did not stand aside for him. They had not needed a custom for this, and so they simply stopped, everywhere, mid-motion, the whole room, and the only sound was the crank, which was in the hands of a junior attendant named Sethri Ulv, who had not left the plinth in 19 hours. She stopped cranking. Continue, Oremy Duel said. She continued. He came and stood in front of the plinth. He looked at the column, filthy on the outside, adhesive bead visible on the cracked ceramic, canvas folded beneath it, brass crank polished bright now by 10,000 turns of webbed hands, and he did what I did not expect, which was that he looked at it for a while with his frill flat, and then he looked at me. Steward Hollies, he said, 9 days ago I made a joke in this hall. I said, I've made a few grand palate. I asked what your water tasted of. It was a good joke. The hall laughed. I have thought about it every hour since the 11th morning. His voice had gone to gravel. The Quichean throat does not do well dry. It was a good joke, and it was made by a man who had never in his life been thirsty, and I did not know that this was a thing that could be true of a man, and now I know it, and I have nothing to set in the place where the joke was. And I did what I have done in every room I have ever been in. I filled a cup, but I did not hold it out to him, because I had watched them for 19 days and I had learned something, and this is the only clever thing I did on Semirith, and I would like it recorded honestly. I did not do it to make a point. I did it because the man was 90 years old and I did not want him to have to reach. I asked Osik for the bowl. The Grand Palette's tasting bowl is black stone, worn thin, older than the record. It came from the alcove of the first spring where it has sat for 600 years, and it holds perhaps 80 milliliters, and Osik van carried it down the hall with both hands and set it on the plinth beside my cracked ceramic column and stepped back. I poured the filtered water into it. It came out of the catch basin gray-tinged, because the 4th cartridge was 3/4 loaded, and it went into that bowl looking exactly as bad as it has ever looked. Then I picked the bowl up, and I drank from it first, which is what a host does, and which is what my grandmother did in front of neighbors who had called her superstitious and difficult, and I set it down, and I pushed it 2 inches across the plinth toward the grand palette of Semirith, and I said, "You're welcome to it, sir. It's the 9th best water I've ever had." Osik van made a sound. I do not know what it was. It is not in the patch. Oremy Duel picked up the bowl. His hands were steady. He held it under his nose for a long moment, and every Quichean in that hall watched a 90-year-old man do the thing he had done 10,000 times. The pause, the draw, the second lids closing, and then he drank it, all of it, and stood with his eyes shut. Nobody laughed. Nobody wept. The crank turned. Sethri had not stopped because I had told her on the first night never to stop, that a column run dry chatters and the face fouls, and she was 19 and she was following her instructions. The Grand Palate opened his eyes. He held the empty bowl out, and Osik took it, and Oremy Duel turned to the record. Hanth Ilam had brought it down, the great book of the hall, and it lay open on the stone. And he said the words that begin the tasting note, which are ceremonial, and which mean approximately, "Let it be entered as it was found." Then he stopped, because the tasting note has 3 parts, and the first part is the name of the vintage, and the name of a vintage is the name of the spring, and there was no spring. He stood there, the oldest and most precise instrument on that moon, in front of 400 of his people, with a stylus in his hand and no word. He said to me quietly, "Steward, what do you call it?" And it would have been so easy. I want you to know that I felt the shape of it, the sentence sitting right there, warm, 4 words long. "We call it water." It would have been a very good line. It would have cost him something I did not have any right to take. I said, "Grand Palate, it isn't mine to name. It came out of your rock." Oremy Duel looked at me for a long moment. The frill lifted, 1 centimeter, gray and cracked. Then he bent over the record and he wrote, in the formal hand, in the place where the name of the vintage goes, "The 10th spring." And under the tasting note, where the record has held for 900 years only the words that mean as it was, he wrote 1 word, which the patch would not translate, and which Sethri translated for me afterward, on the floor of my quarters with her knees up. It means sufficient, but it is not the flat word. It is the word they use of a thing that is enough and is not yet finished, a spring that is giving, a debt that is being paid, a child who is going to live. They cut the 10th alcove that winter. I have seen the pictures. It is at the end of the curve past the 9th, and it is not a basin because there is nothing to put in a basin. There is a plinth of black stone. On the plinth there is a ceramic column, cracked, sealed with a bead of human adhesive, wrapped at the base in canvas with a brass crank on the side. They asked for it. I gave it to them. I have a better one now. The Quichen make them, and they are very good, and they are beautiful, which mine never was, and they run at 90 liters an hour, and they cost more than my ship. The trade contract was signed on the 29th day. Delia got the 6th and 7th springs at a price that made the council sit down, and she got them on a 100-year term, and she came to my quarters afterward and stood in the doorway with a bottle of something and said, "You know they'd have given us the first." "I know," I said. "You know I couldn't take it." "I know that too," I said, and she laughed, and we drank the something which was not water and was not as good. There is one more thing. On the last day Sethri Ulv walked me to the ramp. Her frill was silver again, and it lay flat, and she had been promoted, and she carried nothing, because I had nothing left to carry. She said, "Steward, I have a question I have not been permitted to ask." "Ask it." "When it is bad," she said, "your water, when there is a thing in it and you know there is a thing in it and you have not yet passed it through the burnt wood, in that hour, what do you call it in your language?" The wind came across Semirith gray and cold and smelling like wet slate. Below us, 800 meters down, the Umara was pouring and would pour for another 3 billion years, indifferent, generous, full of a colorless filament 4 microns long. "Water," I said. She thought about it. The second lids flicked once sideways. "That is a very poor word," she said. "It is," I said. "It's the only one we've got. We've had to do a lot with it." She went back inside. I went up the ramp. And that is all that happened on the water moon of Semirith, where they laughed at a ceramic pipe on a windowsill for 11 days, and then cut a 10th alcove in a hall that had held 9 of them for 900 years, and left it, as far as I know, without a basin, because there is nothing in it that rises on its own, and it has to be turned by hand, and they have decided that this is the point.